Hi, everyone. We have a very different show today. I'm going to be interviewing a friend of mine who was sort of an infamous character to some people on the famous TV show Friends, and her name is Angie Featherstone.
Good luck with your girlfriend.
Oh, thank you. Wait!
You got my message.
Hey, you are right on time.
So, what do you say? Can I be your girlfriend again?
Yes, you can very much.
Angie, I'm so happy to have you on my channel.
I'm really happy and honored to be here. Thanks.
So I have several questions. The first is, in terms of playing this character who broke up Ross and Rachel, it was probably the most famous breakup in the world. What the heck? Ross and Rachel meant a lot to Friends fans like me, and I just wonder if you have anything to say for yourself.
Let me think. I mean, not really, but I mean, superficially speaking, no, because a lot of it was lost on me. It wasn't until years later that I realized there's a moment in the bar scene where Chloe says to Ross, "What's the matter with you? You married or something? Because that's okay." And so I realized, oh, she sort of really was clear and complicit in many ways. But yeah, I mean, ultimately, I was just acting.
Of course, I mean, I guess I can let it slide, but I talk to people in my videos about how important it is when the other person is confused and maybe they say something like, I want a break. That doesn't mean that you just have a license to do anything if you want them back. Now, if you don't want them back, I mean, it doesn't matter. But in the show, Ross famously said to basically explain what he had done and try to excuse it, he said, "We were on a break." And I'll tell people, just because you're on a break or the other person is confused, it doesn't give you a license. And like I said, if you don't want the relationship, then it doesn't matter. But you need to really make sure that it's clear between the two people. And that's where communication is so important. And sometimes people will say, well, it's not fair. If they broke up with me or that we're on a break or they're not sure about me, I should be able to do whatever I want. And I get that. I mean, yes, technically you should, but you can't expect the other person to emotionally understand that. It still may hurt very much. They still may feel betrayal, especially if they're not pursuing other people or doing things with other people during that time. And that's why it's so important to be clear and understand what's going on. So I have another question. Do you think fans of the show will ever forgive you? I'm just kidding. That's not the real question. So this is something we talked about even before recording, but do you see the character as a villain or do you see her as something else?
Well, I see her as an opportunity to go down a rabbit hole about boundaries. And like when I always sort of get asked questions about the character in the context of it being this very high concept TV series. But when you and I started talking about it in the context of your work, which I love, and one of the things I love a few things about your work, but one of them is that I love sports psychology. I love Wins, Losses, and Lessons by Lou Holtz. I love anything that takes something very complex and puts it into something very simple and practical. And you do that excellently. And so I'm a fan of your work, and we're excited to have you be a part of fostering care. And I think that as far as Chloe goes in the context of being the person, and you're right, I didn't know because I didn't really watch the show. I found out later from Courtney Cox that they kept talking about me all the time for years after I'd been on the show. But I think of this as this character and that role as a very interesting opening for a conversation about boundaries. And I see in this, when I think about talking about her with you, I think, wow, this is incredible, because it really is important to discuss what breakup means. And what if someone says to me, like, I want to take a break, then I would like to know what that means. Because I
Right.
personally have things about, like, I don't really do breaks. I just either I end it or it's ended. I don't really like to take breaks, but mostly just because you have to almost have a negotiation. And I do
Mm.
think that with Ross and Rachel, for example, I mean, it depends on what the reason for the breakup is. I don't know the history of Ross and Rachel as a couple before I came along. So I don't know. Was someone interested in someone else? Or was this just, they needed a mental health break, or they were really needing to focus on their career for a little bit? Or what were the parameters of this breakup? So in the context of whether or not Chloe was a villain, I think she was a little bit of a villain because she didn't care if he was married or not. So I think that was really what left her very vulnerable in that situation, to be hated. But I think, yeah, I don't know. It seems to really hit a chord with the world, literally the world. This idea that they were on a break or they weren't on a break. And I think that it must really resonate with a lot of people. And I can only imagine that the thing that resonates with people is the vagueness, how important that world of vagueness is, and how most people love that world so that they don't actually have to put anything on the line. You don't really risk anything if you leave it vague, and you're really lucky because if you want to be a victim, you're almost guaranteed to be able to take that situation and make yourself a victim, and if you don't have clarity.
Right. And the other person takes all the risk, because if they go do something that the person who wanted the break doesn't like, then that person can say, you broke the rules. And of course, the other person's like, what rules? We didn't establish any rules. And that's why it goes back to what you said. It's so important to be clear and communicate and not depend on the other person being a mind reader. So as everyone knows now, Ross and Rachel ended up getting married. They were able to survive Chloe. And I talk about this a lot, but when a couple, and I know we're dealing with a fictitious couple here, but the message and the lesson is still there, and that is when a couple just keeps finding their way back to each other, that's when they have staying power. That's where the magic is. And I remember watching when Rachel and Ross got married. I mean, it was a big deal. And I also remember there was a scene where Ross was getting dressed in his tux because he was going to take Rachel to the prom, because the man who was going to take her stood her up and he didn't want her to be hurting. He saw her crying. So he goes and he changes into a tux and he has some flowers in his hands for her and he starts to walk down the stairs. But then the guy shows up and he takes Rachel to prom, and Ross is really sad about that. Just breaks his heart. And Rachel actually sees a video of that later, and Ross didn't want her to see it, but when she did, Ross is kind of off in the corner to himself because he's embarrassed. Rachel walks across the room and just gives him this epic kiss. And the TV audience just went crazy. But the message here is that they were able to survive and kept finding their way back to each other. So when you were in that role of Chloe, did you ever think that it would be the topic of a relationship coaching show one day? I'm sure you were wondering if it would be.
Oh my God. 20 years I've been scratching my head wondering when you would come. It's really funny because 100% no, but also at that time, this relationship coaching or this whole world of authentic connection and intimacy was not something that I was interested in. Psychology of serial killers when I was working on this show.
Whoa.
And so 20 something, 25 years later, I love this world. I love this world of relationship coaching and dating coaching. And I actually always used to say, what are the rules? I don't have the rules. I don't know what the rules are. Someone needs to tell me the rules. And I feel like one of the things that's happened, and certainly as you know, you're my favorite, that's happened in the last couple of years, it seems, is that there's so many people online talking about the rules. Mm-hmm. You do it best, of course. And Coach Ken. Um, but yeah, so it makes perfect sense that that would be a part of my journey and my evolution as a person. Because if you look at the characters that I was playing in the late 90s, whether it was the maid on Seinfeld, or Chloe on Friends, or Linda the bitch and the wedding singer, they were all very similar in type. And so it makes sense that I would have this journey of to this world of dating and relationship coaching.
Well, you were the one who got me back into watching Friends again because I just hadn't been watching it. I mean, the show had been off the air for a while, except for reruns. And then I started talking to you and about the great work you're doing with the kids who need so much of our love and support. And I remember it was just a couple of days after we had spoken. We had been speaking for a little while, but we'd had a conversation, and so you were fresh on my mind. And I walked in the living room, and the TV was on. Somebody was flipping channels, and Friends was on. And I said, "Stop!" And it was actually a scene where I saw Ross, and I thought, "Is this the scene where?" And then you walked in, and you give Ross this hug, and I just thought, "Wow, what a coincidence!" So I took a picture of that, and I actually sent it to you, and I said, "Look what just came on my TV." And so that was really interesting, the timing on that. So what's happened with you since the show's been off the air, since you were Chloe on Friends? And I think people have forgiven you by now, especially since Ross and Rachel got married. But what's been going on with Angie Featherstone since the show's been over?
Well, thank you for asking. And I do hope, I mean, it has been really, Friends has been really popular in the last couple of years. So I think people's anger has been reignited, but it seems to be quelling again. What I've been doing since then, since 1998, what I've been doing is I created a trauma healing intensive and healing trade school for youth aging out of foster care. Because in as much as I used to say, what are the rules for dating? I need to know what the rules are. I feel like a lot of the path that I've been led on in healing and in studying about human nature, I realized that this particular demographic of kids, in particular 18 to 21, who are aging out of foster care, they don't have any of the rules either. They didn't have parent figures to look at. They were basically institutionalized, and now they're coming out into the world. And a lot of them, I think it's like 80 to 90% end up homeless or commit suicide or go to prison. And so most of them don't have, I just saw a statistic today, 40% of all homeless on the streets of Los Angeles are from foster care. So if they don't
Wow,
have
what was
the
that?
internet,
What was that statistic again? What was the percentage?
40% of all the homeless in LA County right now, which we have a homelessness crisis here,
Right.
40% are from foster care.
Wow, that's very telling. That's
So
sad.
they don't have YouTube. They don't have the luxury of Coach Lee. They don't have the luxury of going into community and studying and learning and having a great acupuncturist or a great yoga teacher. And so I took my trauma healing paradigm with all my healers and all my teachers and including you, and we've created this template that we're giving to this demographic. And we just partnered with Learn for Life's trauma, which are trauma resilient educational communities across the nation. So we'll have an accredited classroom as well. So our youth will be graduating with a lot of teaching certificates. So they'll have, livelihoods in this world.
Yeah, so that's terrific. And for those of you who know about the challenges that California is facing on multiple levels, I mean, it's substantial. And this is someone, Angie Featherstone, who's doing something about it. She's not just looking at it and saying, "Oh, that's a shame." She's getting her hands dirty. She's rolling up her sleeves, and she's doing work to help her fellow countrymen and women. And one of the things I say, when you're looking for a relationship partner, the number one trait that you want in that person is empathy, that they can put themselves into another person's shoes, that they don't see themselves as above the other person so they don't have to, but they actually look at them and they can feel sorrow for them. They can feel a sense of ought, like I ought to do something to help, or I ought to fix my behavior because I'm hurting them. That's what you're looking for in a relationship partner. And that's what we're all looking for, just in a good human being. And so if you want to help and I strongly encourage you to do so. We're going to put a link in the description, and there's going to be one here on the screen, and you can donate. It can be a small amount, that's all you can do, but this is something that actually helps. This is a great cause, and people say that a lot. Oh, this is a good cause, but this is one of the best because you're helping orphans. It's not going to buy cars. It's not going to pay a bunch of people to work in an office. It's going directly to help kids who really need it. And we're only as strong as the weakest among us. And so that's another reason why we should be helping them. So, Angie, tell us where people can donate to your organization.
Absolutely. Thank you, Lee. I always think of you as Coach Lee, so it's weird to call you Lee.
You can call me Lee.
Okay, thanks. Go to fosteringcare.org. And on there, you'll have descriptions of all the healers of our board. You'll get to read about our mission, and there'll be a big donate button in the middle of the first page and also in the top right corner as you go through the website. So it's fostering care, fosteringcare.org.
Yeah, so that website address will be on the screen here, and it will be in the description, and you should definitely go and donate to help out this great cause in this situation. But Angie, I have a question for you, and we've talked about this before, but you mentioned that 40% of the homeless were in foster care, and so that should be sounding alarms for us. But I'm wondering what your thoughts are as someone who I guess we could call a foster care expert or an orphan expert in terms of what they face and what they need. I wonder what your answer would be to this question. And as a relationship coach, this is one that I specifically want to ask you and let people hear your answer. But what do you see as the challenges that people who've been in foster care face as far as functioning in romantic relationships?
Yeah, thanks. That's a great question. And we talked about it in the very beginning when we first started talking about fostering care, because the statistic is that I read is that 80% of all trafficking survivors are from foster care. They've done time in the child welfare system. And when I look at that statistic and I look at my experience in foster care and what I've seen personally, and also by mentoring a kid in foster care for 9 years, I understand easily how that could happen because, one, as you mentioned, they have zero experience of watching adults, people in relationship having conflict and conflict resolution. Intimacy is non-existent unless it's inappropriate because they're incarcerated. They're children who are wards of the court. So there's no actually condoned physical intimacy, and the emotional intimacy would be very risky at best, right? And most of it would be very transitional because they're moving constantly and the staff are being changed all the time. So there's really no space for healthy modeling of intimacy and connection. And also they're deprived. I mean, it's my experience is that foster care is criminal neglect. They're deprived of true care and care for the soul of the child and meeting their needs in an organic and authentic way, as opposed to what's regulated by, what's the minimum that you can get away with doing on a daily basis if you're staff. So there's attention, there's noticing, there's all of that, but there's also the financial, like most of these kids have like a plastic garbage bag with 3 or 4 pairs of pants and a couple pairs of old shoes. They really don't have a lot of nice things. And these are children coming of age. Children need to have like a special place where they put their favorite little perfume bottle or their little ring that their grandma gave them, or, their new Nikes or whatever it is. And they don't have that. So that makes them even financially very vulnerable as well. So yeah, I feel that we have an incredible moral obligation to tend to them. And it's not just because, as you said, they don't have parents, but they don't have any community. They don't have access to community. They don't usually get to go to church. And if they do, they're sort of brought in as a group, and there's just not a lot of that opportunity for authentic expansion.
Angie, when I was growing up, I was a military brat. And a lot of the people who I hung out with when I was a kid, they were basically playmates. I don't know that I would call them friends because they would leave after 2 or 3 months. Their dad would be shipped off and I wouldn't see them again. But occasionally there would be someone my age or close to it who would be there for a while. And I had a dear friend who was in foster care. He was with 2 people who had brought him into their home. And that's about all I knew about it. I didn't really know how it worked. And we spent so much time together. We had a ton of fun spending a winter, playing in the woods, riding bikes in the summer as well. And then one day I remember I was at my window in my room and I just kind of glanced up and I saw him running down the street. And I went to the door and he was kind of yelling my name before he even got to the door. It's like, Lee, Lee. And he comes to the door and he says, I've been adopted. They adopted me. He says his parents' names. And I really didn't know what to think because I thought he already had been. I thought that when they brought him into their home that was a done deal. And it occurred to me, this kid had basically been auditioning for at least a year of his life, hoping that these people would end up saying, yes, you can live with us. We will be your parents. And I remember even at age 10, 11, thinking how heartbreaking that was, how difficult that must have been on him, and just how sorry I felt for him, but how happy I was because I actually saw tears coming down his face. I mean, this was a moment, and I remember that moment with him as just being one of my dear friends who had some terrific news brought to him.
It's a beautiful story.
And he was one of the lucky ones because a lot of kids don't get that who are in that situation. They don't get to have a mom and a dad who say, yes, live with us. We will take care of you and raise you and mentor you and help you and love you. And kids at that age, they can really be cruel, heartless. Sometimes it might seem like they definitely don't always have the empathy that they should. But he was so different because we were friends for a long time. He lived very close, so we spent a lot of time. I mean, we could just walk to each other's house in two minutes. And I remember he was so much kinder than most of the other kids. He never said a harsh word to me or an unkind word to me, even if we disagreed. He was just careful with what he said, and he was a positive person. And a lot of that, I think, is because he placed so much value on relationships and friendships because he had been in and out of foster homes all of his life. And he was probably a lot like me, at least at that age, and that a lot of the people that he interacted with were basically playmates because it was so short-lived. And that was one of the privileges I had of being his friend, was just learning what it's like when someone really appreciates and values your friendship and they don't take it for granted. They treat you so much better and warmer and softer. They're careful with how they treat you. And that's one of the things that he taught me. And I've thought a lot about that, whereas I hadn't thought about it really in, I guess, a few years until I met you and we started talking about the situation and what you're doing. And it came to my mind again. And I just thought, what a wonderful experience, a wonderful story I had knowing him as a kid.
Yeah, and what I like about that story too is it reminds me so much, because you're touching right on something that's the truest of vulnerabilities of, when you've not been chosen and you're little, and that the pain that causes. And then, of course, then there's the excitement of being chosen, which is also transformative, but the not being chosen part is also transformative. One of the things that I love a lot about your work in particular is that you don't go right on the nose about building self-esteem. You sort of do this very practical, like 5 quick steps in without you knowing to build self-esteem. And I think that any tools and tips that can build self-esteem, especially if you're sort of bypassing the part of the brain that likes to short circuit a lot and go right to actually your self-esteem has been improved, is incredible for all of us. But of course, those of us who have battled low self-esteem from certain injuries.
Right. Yeah, of course. So everybody, this has been Angie Featherstone. She's a terrific person who's doing remarkable work. She's seen a problem. She's seen people in pain and difficulty, and she's doing something about it. And The web address again to donate to her organization is going to be on the screen here. It's going to be in the description below. And I strongly encourage you to give. It will come back to you, and you will be a blessing in people's lives. You'll be helping these kids, these orphans, foster kids, to actually learn how to function in society, how to have healthy relationships, because they have been left in large part to their own devices and just kind of with each other. They're not getting a lot of adult mentoring and love and help. And we can do something about it, and that's what Angie is doing. And I can't be more proud to have her on the show and as a friend, and I strongly encourage you to help where you can with her organization. Angie, thank you so much for being on my channel in this show.
My pleasure and my honor, and special shout out to all your fans and followers and supporters.
Well, that's going to conclude it, everybody. This has been Coach Lee, and as always, thank you for watching.